This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Have you been thinking about therapy? Have you been trying to get in to see a therapist? Have you found that a lot of therapists that you've been recommended to have either closed books or they've got a really long waiting list? Sometimes months. If you're lucky, it's a couple of weeks. Now, what if there was an alternative that gave you quicker access and at your convenience? So when starting to think about looking for a therapist, try BetterHelp. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient and flexible to your schedule needs. So just fill out the brief questionnaire and get matched with a registered therapist. You can also switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So get moving with therapy and visit BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/Gunter today will give you 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gunter, GUNTER.
Listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host. I want to pick up from our last episode with the wonderful Karen Sander and the impact of storytelling on personal development and social transformation. Today, I'm actually going to take a bit of a deep dive into my first novel, an epic historical novel called Mountains of the Sea. It's set in the mid-18th century, and as I said, it was my first approach to writing a novel. And it was fundamentally inspired by my love and devotion to the sea and the cultures of the Pacific. My aim initially and throughout the book was that the story was to captivate with its adventure and the intrigues, and to serve also as a powerful tool for understanding oneself. Mountains of the Sea basically takes us deep into pre-colonial Hawaiian culture, and as it's seen through the eyes of Walter Beaumont, an English aristocrat, second-born English aristocrat, and that's important in the story, who basically embarks on a transformative journey. When we first meet, Walter is a spoilt brat, basically. Now, the story does more than just recount historical events. What I hoped to do was to pull us into the personal evolution of a man who faces the unknown, and where he needs to change and make profound, deep changes to who he is, to learn fundamentally deep courage and curiosity. So initially, Walter, our hero, is quite comfortable within the rigid confines of his European society, but there is a deep-seated discontent that leads him fundamentally to lead a life of, as I put it in the story, of debauchery. And for whatever reason, he ends up having to escape those confines. And his journey takes him to Hawaii, where both the journey and Hawaii challenges every preconception he has about life, leadership, and most importantly, love. Now, the metaphor is that in this journey, he learns to navigate the giant swells of the sea. to master the mountains of the sea. And in doing so, he also learns to navigate the tumultuous changes in his life. Now, the beauty of storytelling, especially through historical fiction like Mountains of the Sea, lies in its dual capability to both educate and to engage. You know, reading books in some ways, in some areas, and especially with boys and men, has become almost a dying practice. And I want to inspire boys and men to get back into reading books and not just clickbait, you know, in the doomsday scrolling that we engage in with our smart devices that aren't necessarily that smart. And in doing so, as a reader, we are not just passive observers, but actually, you know, we're active participants in learning to understand the emotions and motivations of the characters. Now, this engagement is what makes stories such a powerful psychological tool. The story elicits empathy. It enables us to become less binary about good, bad, but experience the characters and the character arc from many different angles, especially through the arc of change. Now, psychologists have found that engaging with stories tends to lead, as I said, to increased empathy, but also enhanced problem solving skills. And through that, we learn through our engagement with the character what to draw from to become more resilient. Walter's story basically mirrors the hero's journey. This is a concept that was put together by Joseph Campbell. And I'll go a little bit more in depth here about Campbell's hero's journey. Okay, so what's the hero's journey? I've talked about Joseph Campbell before, and he coined this pattern and brought the hero's journey to light in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. The hero's journey is a template. Campbell calls it the monomyth that many stories across cultures follow. From ancient myths to modern movies, this is a narrative cycle that resonates deeply with human psychology. Think Star Wars, you know, Luke Skywalker, you know, his call to the adventure, which is the first place where the hero begins to get challenged, was getting off Tatooine. Right? Now, the journey, as I said, typically begins with a call to adventure, and that can be all sorts of stuff. In Walter's case, it was a particular event in the beginning of the story that forces him to make a decision. And this is where the hero leaves the familiar world behind, you know, the rigid confines, the habituated way of living, the automatic, almost sedated way of being that many of us unfortunately fall into, where we, you know, experience what I often talk about being the golden handcuffs. You know, we chain ourselves to a way of living that actually doesn't resonate with our authentic self, but, you know, is a consequence of the constructed self. You know, where I'm meeting all the social and family expectations, the expectations of being a provider, a father, a partner, husband, you know, a community person like, you know, an athlete or you know, a footy player, whatever it is. Those are the, you know, parts of the constructed self. They are essentially not truly authentically me. So what happens in this call to adventure then is that decision point. They often encounter a mentor, they face trials and tribulations, Luke Skywalker's mentor was Obi-Wan Kenobi. And ultimately, they experience a victory. And as the cycle continues, eventually return with newfound wisdom or a boon for their community. Now, psychologically, this whole process actually mirrors our life processes. Each of us is, in essence, on a personal hero's journey. The stages reflect our own challenges, our own growth, our own transformation. Psychologically, in therapy, one of the first ones that I often see is between, the age of 27 and 32. Now, interestingly, in astrology, apparently this is also recognised and is often referred to as the Saturn return. Now, I don't understand much about, astrology, other than it's interesting and sometimes throws up some very curious explanations for how people are that can be at times sort of accurate. But being trained as a scientist, I'm sort of skeptical. Okay, got to keep my skepticism in play. Doubt, as I've said, is more important than the truth. And when things are sprouted as the truth at times or as the absolute truth, I get a little edgy. Andrew Huberman, has a tendency to do that with supposed scientific research. So you got to, take things with a grain of salt and run them through the mill, the reality check. So the question comes up as to why is this narrative so compelling? Well, studies in narrative psychology suggest that when we hear a story, our brain lights up, not only in the language processing parts, but also in the areas that we would use as if we were actually experiencing the events of the story. We have a psychophysiological emotional reaction. This immersive experience can evoke deep, deep emotional responses and foster a profound connection to the narrative. Who amongst you has not cried deeply at certain points in the story, especially when the hero or is challenged and it seems like all is lost? Most of us have some reaction. If we don't, we're blocking ourselves. We have sedated ourselves. We're not engaged with the story per se. So the story then and the connection to the story is not just merely entertainment. It has a profound therapeutic potential. Through identifying with a hero, individuals can find courage, they can find motivation, and therefore feel that they can face their own adversity with a great deal more courage and strength. It's a form of narrative therapy where stories help people reshape their own lives towards positive outcomes. For example, in therapy, when individuals are asked to see their problems through the lens of the hero's journey, they can begin to conceptualize their challenges as necessary parts of their growth. I've come to believe, no pain, no gain, and that is true in one's personal growth. So the reframe can reduce feelings of being overwhelmed and increase our resilience. We have a sense of greater agency in this process. So, can the hero's journey be integrated into the Making Good Men Great framework? Yes, it can. I'm a firm believer of that, and the novel bears that out. And I've seen it be particularly effective. If we reimagine masculinity through stories that promote growth, cooperation, inclusivity, and emotional intelligence, we can challenge traditional narratives that no longer serve us. We have to be more flexible, but through self-awareness, through compassion, through gratitude. Now remember, making good men great as a framework recognises the need for change in how men are perceived, how we perceive ourselves, and where we move away from characteristics like, one-sided competition or, binary outcome, win, lose, failure, success, and the combativeness that fosters toxicity, both in ourselves but also in our relationships and in our community. So, let's consider how Walter's experiences can inspire us in our lives. Through his encounters with the native Hawaiians and their culture, Walter learns to value respect, to also experience humility as an essential part of his growth, and to become much, much more open-minded. These qualities, when we reflect them in our own lives, can lead to profound personal growth and much, much stronger community bonds. Also, the act of surfing, central to this particular story, is in itself a metaphor for life. Each wave presents a challenge. The way we choose to meet it can define our path forward. Like Walter, we can learn to embrace the unpredictability of life and use our strengths to overcome challenges and our fears to fuel our own growth. But first of all, we need to dig deep and to go where we often are frightened to go. In Mountains of the Sea, I wrote essentially a vivid portrayal of transformation that is applicable to all of us. The novel is intended to remind us of the power of stories to shape our understanding of the world and of ourselves. It's an invitation to view our own life challenges as part of a larger narrative that is continuously evolving. So as I come to the close of today's episode, I want to encourage you to think about your own story. What is your narrative? What are the challenges that you face? And how can they become opportunities for your growth and your transformation? Now remember, especially us men, let's not blame women, the universe, whatever. Let us take responsibility and let us own it. So how can stories that I engage with inspire me to change and grow? How can that work for you? And on that note, let me thank you for joining me again on Inspire Change with Gunter. If today's discussion inspired you, please share this podcast and join us again as we continue to explore storytelling and how we can transform our lives. We always have a story at the heart of it. So until next time, this is me signing off. Keep seeking change, keep growing, and keep sharing your story, especially with your children, your grandchildren, and, whoever else is willing to listen. And on that note, this is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.guntersvoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.